This is a very special book. It's called an incunable. It was printed in 1484, one of the oldest printed books.
Whatever.
There's no need to specially introduce Pawn Stars or what it is that they do on their show. They get different items from different people and sources, then they sell them or pawn them at more profitable prices. They've managed to do this continuously for a long duration of seasons. However, everything doesn't always go as planned, and there are times that they could end up paying too much for an item that just, well, isn't worth it. What should be a profitable deal could easily end up costing thousands of dollars. So in this video, we will be taking a look at 5 times Rick Harrison lost some substantial amount of money on the TV show. Hello and welcome back to Splash. Today we're going to be talking about 5 times that the Pawn Stars got ripped off. But before we get to that, go ahead and like and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us out a lot. Also, make sure that you keep watching to number 1 to find out how much they lost and why. You'll be shocked once you find out. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. Number 5. Baseball signed by the 1951 New York Yankees. This was a scenario when customers could have easily been cheated when the old man threw a bad offer at a seller. Clint came into the shop with a baseball signed by the 1951 World Series champion New York Yankees. After the signature had been authenticated by handwriting expert Brenda, she offered some useful pieces of advice to the old man. According to her, the value of the ball is really subjective. It just comes down to what a buyer is willing to pay and what the seller is willing to get for it.
The value of the ball is really subjective. It just comes down to what a buyer is willing to pay for it and what the seller is willing to get for it.
Clint had already offered an initial asking price of $3,000, but the old man decided to offer a snowballing amount and said, "I'm gonna shoot you a price. If you don't like it, don't hit me, but I'd be a buyer at about $800. Clint refused the offer and left the shop, and ended up turning out to be a good decision. That's because in 2017, a similar ball was featured on Antique Roadshow. The difference was that this ball was signed by Marilyn Monroe, who later married team captain Joe DiMaggio. The ball ended up costing $15,000. It cost that amount due to Marilyn's signature and would still cost without it. In simple terms, the old man presented an irritating offer and Clint decided to turn it down.
So what are you trying to get out of it, Clint?
I think $3,000 is a reasonable amount for the ball.
I'll be glad to negotiate with you, but you're going to have to come down a whole lot if we cut a deal. I'm going to shoot you a price. If you don't like it, don't hit me, but I'd be a buyer at about $800.
Well, I would respectfully decline.
The offer will stand. You're welcome back anytime.
I appreciate it.
Number 4. Samurai Sword. This is a perfect example of when the guys decided to intentionally pay low for an item brought to the shop. Corey ended up undertaking and smashing a negotiation which could have possibly earned the shop about $10,000. The seller was David, who claimed to have gained possession of the sword after a client who used it as collateral failed to return the money. To prove how bad of a deal this was, Corey had admitted before the negotiations had begun that he knew that these could easily get a few $1,000s. So even the initial offer of $800 was a bad deal. After some little negotiations, both parties agreed on a price of $1,500. Seems like a good deal, right? Well, later on, an expert had determined the sword cost around $5,000 to $6,000 in its current condition. If Corey went ahead and spent another $3,000 to restore the item, its value could rise as high as $15,000.
This is a samurai sword made right around 1600. It was pretty screwed up because it was 400 years old, so the best sword maker in Japan to restore it for me.
Number 3. 1890s Colt 45 Peacemaker Revolver. In the Season 4 episode Peacemaker, Rick buys an eponymous 1890s Colt 45 revolver, which he says sell better than just about any antique gun I carry. Rick's excitement is palpable, especially after the seller Brian foolishly reveals that he purchased it for $25. They eventually agreed on a price of $3,000. Upon inspection of the revolver, weapons expert Sean tells Rick that the gun is worth at least $5,000 in its current condition. But in fact, depending on exactly how rare the specific model is, it could be worth much more. For instance, the first ever Colt 45 Peacemaker, originally manufactured in 1873, was sold at auction in 1987 for a whopping $242,000. According to New York Times, granted the gun featured on Pawn Stars was from much later and was likely part of a larger production line, but the current pricing on a similar era Colt 45 ranges from around $2,000 all the way up to $42,000.
So we have an 1876 really fancy Colt. Okay, so what is this piece of magic worth?
I would safely guess that this would sell for $35,000. If it went above 50, it wouldn't really surprise me.
You give me 40,000, I walk out the door.
So yes, Rick made an offer within that market range, but not surprisingly, it was on the extremely low end. Number 2, Hotchkiss Cannon. Field artillery collector Chuck rolled his 1890 Hotchkiss cannon into the parking lot at Gold and Silver Pawn, aiming to land a deal. Things were looking up when Rick asked his weapons expert, "What can I pay for it and still make a few bucks?" To which he replied, "I would say $40,000 all day long."
So how much does something like this go for? I mean, what can I pay for it and still make a few bucks? A good shootable gun like this, I would say $40,000 all day long.
Of course, Chuck is pleased, but then he immediately commits the fatal flaw of any negotiation, which is to reveal his bottom line number before the haggling even begins. "I expected about $30,000, Chuck says, instantly alleviating himself of a potential of $10,000. Rick seizes on Chuck's misstep and agrees to $30,000 as long as the cannon still fires. It does, and they shake on the deal.
Let's go see if it shoots.
Okay.
It shoots, I'll give you the 30 grand.
Deal.
Okay.
Go up every time he shoots it.
Obviously, you could say, well, that's the seller's fault for undercutting himself, but clearly Rick knew what he was doing and expertly capitalized on the seller's low expectation. Number 1, 1962 Lincoln Continental. In another Season 1 episode, Rick and the old man make a steal of a deal on a restored 1962 Lincoln Continental. The seller, Devin, says he did most of the engine work himself, but he's put enough time and money into it that he's ready to let it go. He says he wants to get $13,000 to $14,000 for it, but the classic beauty is a seriously neglected interior, so Devin eventually parts ways with it for just $9,500. Interestingly, they note that the original showroom price for the vehicle was $10,000, meaning they actually paid less for the car in 2009 than it cost new in 1962, and not usually the case with classic cars in relatively decent shape. Anyway, there's the usual handwriting over whether the restoration costs will financially destroy them, but they didn't. They spent $15,000 to get the car back into showroom shape, but were left with a vehicle worth of $30,000 to $35,000 depending on the buyer. Meaning this deal was a possible $5,000 to $10,000 gain for the Pawn Stars.
This car is a piece of art.
Yeah, we rebuilt everything. The engine's rebuilt, transmission, suspensions, brakes, all of it. Put a new AC compressor on it.
Oh, she's beautiful. Anytime you get something this beautiful, you can wait on it.
Amen. It goes without saying that I'm ecstatic that Richard Sr. is happy with his Chrysler.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this. While you are here, go ahead and click the links above to check out some of our other awesome videos. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next video.